Hello students, good morning all of you. Today I Rabindra Mohan Misra from Sri Jagdamba Sanskrit College Batho am taking the class of Shastri II. Today we see the summary of Act 2, Scene 2 of the play Merchant of Venice. Earlier we have seen summary of Act 2, Scene 1st yesterday. Today we see Act 2, Scene 2 of the play Merchant of Venice. The Merchant of Venice is a great play by William Shakespeare. William Shakespeare was a great dramatist. He was certainly one of the most successful writers of his time. In this scene, he has given many ups and downs about the characters. After the last rather serious scene in Belmont, we return to Venice, and the initial emphasis here on Lancelot Gower, Shylock's servant, and on thrifty knight. Lancelot is debating with himself as to whether or not he should remain in Shylock's service. Lancelot Gower works for Shylock as a servant, but he is debating whether or not to leave his job and seek a new master. His conscience tells him to remain with Shylock because it is the honest and responsible thing to do. Even though Lancelot hates Shylock, he is tempted to leave and find employment elsewhere, but he is unable to make up his mind. The decision is difficult, he says, for he feels the weight of his conscience hanging about the neck of his heart. The fiend, as Lancelot calls his opposite impulse, tells him to run away. Lancelot talks with his father, old Gibo, and reveals his desire to leave Shylock's employ. At that moment, Bassanio appears along with Leonardo and other followers, and he is enthusiastically talking to preparation for a dinner tonight, complete with a masque to which he has invited his friends to celebrate his departure for Belmont, where he will begin his courtship of Portia. Lancelot is quick to note Bassanio's good mood, and he immediately speaks to him about Bassanio's hiring him as a servant. Bassanio agrees and orders a new set of livery for his new servant. Old Gobo engages him in a conversation, telling him Lancelot is unhappy in his current position and wishes to serve another employer. Bassanio becomes impatient with their wordiness, but Lancelot steps in and asks Bassanio for a job, a wish Bassanio immediately grants. Lancelot is overjoyed and read a positive, if unlikely, fortune in his own palm before leaving to give Shylock notice. Lancelot describes his objection to Shylock by saying, "My master is very jade," and saying he is famished in Shylock's service. These lines imply that Shylock does not feed Lancelot sufficiently or that he does not pay Lancelot enough to feed himself. Either way, the description play into the negative stereotype of Jewish people as greedy and stingy. It is impossible to be sure Lancelot's complaints are entirely objective and are not colored by his prejudice. Lancelot and his father's silliness, including the comical palm reading near the end of the scenes, are an example of the play's inherent ambiguity. It may be interpreted that these foolish and uneducated men are meant to be superior to Shylock, underlying his inferiority in this society. Certainly, these men enjoy greater freedom in Venice than Shylock does. At the same time, their foolishness and lack of education could also indicate their inadequacy as judges of Shylock's character. Graciano comes and is looking for Bassanio. Graciano finds Bassanio and asks to accompany him to Belmont. He tells him, I must go with you to Belmont. Bassanio is hesitant, but he finally consents, urging Graciano to modify his wild behavior, which Graciano agreed to do. But he will do that tomorrow. Tonight, he says, shall be a night of merriment, a gala inaugurating his setting out for Belmont. Bassanio is afraid Graciano is too wild, too rude, and bold of voice, and his behavior might ruin Bassanio's chances with Portia. Graciano promises to put on a sober habit and behave himself as a man might to please his grandam. Bassanio agrees to let Graciano come along, but he allows Graciano this night to indulge his merriment with judgment. Old Gibo is more than sand blind and does not recognize his son. He sees before him only the dim image of a man who he hopes he can direct him to Shylock's house. Lancelot is delighted to encounter his father, whom he has not seen for a long time, and so he conceals his true identity and playful confuses the old man with much cloning and doubtable before revealing who he really is and kneeling to receive his father's blessing. This scene deals with minor diversion and development in the plot. The elopement of Lorenzo and Jessica and Lancelot Gabos transfer to his services from Shylock to Bassanio. Almost all of the scene is taken up with the antics of Lancelot Gobbo, and it may be useful here to consider for a moment the clones and comedy of the Elizabethan stage. This part involved a great deal of comic stage business, improvised actions, gestures, and expressions, and they had their own special routines. Lancelot, for example, would be given a great deal of leeway in using his own special comic device. Much here depend on the actor's business, mime, expression of horror or stupid self-satisfaction, burlesque or parody movements around the stage and so forth. Shakespeare wrote them to give his actor as much scope as was necessary for visual antics. Today we call these gimmicks sight gags or slapstick. The dialogue itself is not particularly witty because the comedy was meant to be mostly physical. Lancelot's opening speech takes the form of a debate between the fiend and his own conscience. The comedy here lies in the fact that the gesture clone Lancelot should regard himself as the hero of a religious drama, but this gives him the opportunity to mimic two separate parts, jumping back and forth on the stage and addressing himself. Well, my conscience says, Lancelot, budge not. Budge says the fiend, budge not says my conscience. Visually, this makes for good comedy. While reading this play aloud, one can enhance this brief scene by imagining that the voice of the conscience is delivered in high, falsetto, flute-like tones. The voice of the fiend, in contrast, is delivered in low, evil-sounding growls. Shakespeare narrows the gap between Venetians and Jews. That Bassanio is willing to take Graciano on a companion despite his evident bad behavior shows the strength of social bonds among Venetian Christians. prejudice against Jave is used to cement bonds between Venetians of different social classes. It seems unlikely that Bassanio would have hired Lancelot away from another Christian. Lancelot seems to feel no bond to Shylock despite having served him for years. In this scene, Lancelot, a kind of clone character, finds himself in a moral dilemma. On the one hand, he had his conscience, which pushes him towards obedience to Shylock, his master. On the other is his prejudice, which he describes as a kind of fiend and which sees Jeeves as a devil. Lancelot speaks of flesh and blood, that is, man's animal being, as the basis for being related. Lancelot also brings up an important question about identity. One can become a Jave or Javishness is inborn and incapable. This sin of cruelty in which a child abuses his parent foreshadows how Shylock's daughter Jessica will abandon him. It also makes Gibo's blindness as interpretive handicaps. He literally cannot say anything. In short, we conclude that the scene